Hello, everybody. This is Corbin, the Serpentine Skipwith, and I'm here with special guest.
Thom Hazaert. Hello.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me. I haven't done a whole lot of interviews lately, so I'm kind of just slowly easing my way back into doing this. But I think I remember how, so I think we'll be good.
I'm very excited for this one. All right, so I just want to start, from the start. So can you tell me what your childhood was like and what the music scene was growing up?
I mean, there wasn't a music scene. I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And, look, in the 80s, I grew up kind of in the 80s, 90s. There was like every band came to the arena. And, I saw Metallica a lot and Poison and Motley Crue. And, the first concert I went to was Quiet Riot and Black Sabbath, who are still one of my favorite bands. And, and then, I saw Kiss a bunch and David Lee Roth, and it was a really good time, man. The 80s was a great time for music, for arena rock. It was, great to be able to see that and be a part of it. And, and then, and then there was another really great place here that for the mid-size shows called the Orpheum Theater. And I saw Pantera there on Cowboys from Hell and Vulgar Display of Power. Like literally the first time I saw Pantera there was like 40 fucking people there, you know what I mean? So I saw Body Count there, like when Cop Killer was out and people were protesting outside. I saw Testament there. And so I guess there was a place, a couple places for big shows and the mid-size shows. And then, but there really wasn't much of a scene here, a local scene. There was a great national scene with stuff coming through, and then for a while it kind of dried up, and now there's another great venue here called the Epic Event Center that's bringing a lot of stuff. And honestly, but most of the good shits now kind of comes to, I have to drive to Milwaukee. I just went to Milwaukee last week to go to Letterkenny Live. I just went down to Madison a couple weeks ago to go hang out with my buddies in Korn. But honestly, most shit now, I either have to drive to Milwaukee or Chicago, but whatever, man, I'm used to it. So, but yeah, there was a cool scene here, and I sort of started as a writer writing for a local paper here called the Green Bay Press Gazette. That's like a huge Gannett Group daily, and that was really where I cut my teeth and how I became, basically doing that. I realized I wrote for a 200,000 circulation daily paper. I realized somewhere around 15, 16 that I could call up any label and they would send me free CDs and concert tickets and let me do interviews because I was writing for this huge fucking paper. And I kind of just used that to my advantage. And that led to writing for bigger publications. And eventually I wrote for Circus and Metal Hammer and, a bunch of other shit. And I still, a couple of years ago, I performed on the Mega Cruise. And, I did a whole magazine for the Mega Cruise. It's always been a defining theme. And what I did is journalism and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's obviously, and a lot of that I kind of figured out how to do here, Yeah.
No, that's wild. Like, that's, yeah, I can just tell, it seems like, from a young age, you've had like a natural talent. Or at least a very ambitious mind.
Yeah, I guess a little bit of both. You know what I mean? I've always been very linguistically gifted. I've always, excelled at language and communication. And yeah, look, since I was 10 years old, I knew I was going to be in the music business in some regard. And literally, since I was 14, I have been. But by the time I was 15, I was legitimately writing for this paper. And I'd interviewed Typo Negative and Life of Agony and all these big bands. And yeah, I really got a taste of it young. And, and yeah, I've always, when I was 19, I got on a Greyhound bus and moved to LA and, really took it to the next level.
Nice. So can you tell me what it was like in the late 1990s to be tapped as an AR guy, a scout for Jive Records?
It was great, man. Honestly, there's more stuff that kind of leads to that, so kind of the early 90s, I met Korn on their first tour and I wrote for Circus and I gave Korn their first feature in a big magazine in Circus. I went, so Korn and Deftones were opening for Ozzy in Madison. I went down to the show. I did an interview with Korn. I did an interview with Deftones. And I'd already met Korn once before, and I kind of broke down with them a little bit. That was my first time meeting the Deftones, and I kind of became good friends with Stefan and Chi that night. And yeah, so that was really the beginning of it, man, was meeting Korn and the Deftones. And then fast forward a little bit, I met Nonpoint and started working with them. And I met Papa Roach really young in their club days when they'd put out their first demo, basically. I met them and kind of became friends with them. And then when I moved to LA, I kind of started getting more in contact with labels, kind of through the writing. I became friends with Monty Connor at Roadrunner and the people over there. And then through that, I kind of became friends with Michael Tedesco at Jive. But again, I was really in tune with all these kind of young bands on this scene that was just kind of developing. I became friends with Cold Chamber. I was friends with the Fear Factory guys. I kind of just slowly found my way into this scene that people now call nu metal, for lack of a better term, that was just sort of developing, man. And I met Papa Roach really young. I met Nonpoint really early in their career. I met a lot of these bands, and I started talking to Michael Tedesco at Jive and started bringing him stuff. And eventually they just said, "Look, why don't we hire you as a scout?" So I brought them Papa Roach. I brought them a really early version of Linkin Park. I brought them Nonpoint. I brought them a bunch of bands, man. And I'd never signed anything to Jive, funny enough, but then I ended up managing bands, and I discovered Chimera, and I managed them and got them signed to Roadrunner. I through them, I met a band called Switched, who are also from Cleveland, and got them signed. Through that same circle, I met a band called Erase the Gray and got them signed to Universal. So it was just this kind of big melting pot of, doing A&R and marketing. And somewhere in there, I, started working with Flip Records. I became friends with Fred Durst, and I met them on their first tour with Korn, and me and Fred kind of became friends. And I just started doing the street team stuff. That's actually how I hooked up with Jive. I did a street team for Head PE, and I honestly don't remember which one predated which. I don't remember if I was doing the Jive stuff first or if I started the Immortal street team first for Limp Bizkit. But either way, I became friends with Fred, and I told him about what I was doing with the street team stuff. And me and him and Jordan sure had a call one day, and he said, "Hey, Jordan, we're going to do a street team, and Tom's going to run it." And Jordan said, "No, we're not. I don't want to do that." And eventually Fred got his way, and that still to this day, people said that was part of what broke Limp Bizkit and Flip's whole roster. And, and it's funny, and Jordan didn't even want to do it, man. The guy who was in the head of Flip didn't even want to do it. He wanted nothing to do with it. But like I said, Fred got his way, and then, then that built, and then I started doing it for Head PE, and then I worked with, Cold Chamber a little bit and became friends with them, and, Human Waste Project. And then I started a marketing company with my partner, Eric, called Loudside, that became Total Assault. And we worked on everything from Incubus to Crazy Town to Methods of Mayhem to Nine Inch Nails to Chris Cornell. We started doing every record for Interscope, Warner Brothers. We worked with Videodrone, Orgy, and Videodrone I ended up managing, who, funny enough, so Chris, the drummer of Videodrone, left and went and formed Edema, who I brought them to the lawyer who got them their deal. So, there's all these weird little things that I was just kind of there involved in some way, shape, or form, man. It was just a good scene where all these bands were, I kind of envisioned it was kind of like the 60s or the 80s, where there was just all these bands around LA and around California, and everybody wanted to sign them. And it was just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. I ended up going and interning at Immortal Records, and worked with them on Life is Peachy and Follow the Leader and a couple of the Korn records and the first Incubus EP and Science and Make Yourself. And so, yeah, I've had a lot of cool experiences and just kind of been in the right place at the right time a whole bunch,
Like already, from what you told me so far, just the amount of there are some people you read, like as far as, when you read back in history on certain individuals, you can just see from an early start, like how talented they were. And you're one of those people, like you can tell how gifted you were so early.
Well, thank you. Look, again, part of it is just having a head for business. Part of it is just communication. Part of it is just being in the right place at the right time and having people like you and want to work with you and being able to, take those things and execute them. So later, as I mentioned, I got Chimera signed, Switched, a band called Depswa, who I got signed to Geffen, which funny enough was with Jordan Schur. So eventually Jordan did so well with Flip that they gave him Geffen Records. So Jordan ran Geffen Records, and I brought this band Depths while I was working with to them, and we did a deal there. And there was actually kind of a bidding war. I mean, Ozzy and Sharon came to, and Jack came down to a showcase for them, and they had their Oz records at the time, and they were interested in them. And Corey Taylor actually wanted to sign them to his label at the time, who was also a good friend of mine at the time, and Geffen. And it just finally it came down to where we felt like the love was, which was at Geffen, which it turned out it really wasn't. But they were a great fucking band, man. Depthswell was really an incredible band, and they could have done so much more if Geffen would have really committed to it. And my friend Jen Littleton over there was one who actually signed them, and she was great. But Jordan and everybody else over there just never really got behind it. So, but whatever, you hear the story every day with a million bands, man. That's kind of the crapshoot you take, sign into a major label. You never know. But that label Slipknot was starting, didn't even end up happening. So if we would have signed there, it never would have even. And honestly, dude, Corey was pissed at me for years because of that. And it didn't make any sense to me because the label, it didn't even exist yet at the time. They were just starting it, and then it didn't even end up happening. They didn't even do the label. So if I would have actually done the deal with them, the band would have been fucked because the label never even ended up getting off the fucking ground. So that's just, the things that happen in this business, man. People just get pissed about weird shit. And, and I've seen Corey a lot since then, and we're fine. But there was a couple of years where Corey was really pissed at me because of that, and again, to me, it didn't make any sense because that label they were doing never even got off the fucking ground, man. It didn't even happen, So, but yeah, I mean, it's always kind of just, and then it's funny, at that point, a bunch of labels were trying to hire me to do A&R. I'd met with Columbia, I'd met with a bunch of other labels, and then the whole business kind of collapsed and stopped signing rock bands. And that's when I went and started Corporate Punishment. I'm like, fuck it, I'll go do it myself. And I did.
Yeah, well, actually, that's actually what I was going to segue into next. So can you tell me more about Corporate Punishment Records?
Yeah, so me and my partner Eric Nielsen, who is the same guy I started Loudside with, we started a label called Corporate Punishment, and he was kind of the tech side, and he was great at that stuff. And I kind of signed to the bands and ran all the business and got all the deals. And so yeah, we were distributed through Koch, and then later E1, and later Trustkill actually at the very end. But we put out, Ivan Moody's band, Ghost Machine, before he was in Five Finger Death Punch. Like, it was basically his band between Motogrator and Five Finger Death Punch. We put out, the guy from Trust Company had a new band. We put that out. I mean, we put out so many records, man. We put out 60 or 70 records, and they all, a lot of them, some of the guys from 18 Visions had a new project. I remember we put that out. Some of the guys from Pitch Shifter, I remember we put out a project with them. I mean, look, it was kind of just a development label. We just kind of, we had a band called Trigger, and we had some, kind of our own bands that we found too, like Trigger Point and Shanoa, which was Jason Hager from Chimera's new band at the time. And, we had a couple, baby bands that we developed that we really loved and really got behind it. Allele, who actually got really big for a minute too. And, yeah, we had some great success with that label. I mean, it really became one of the premier independent labels in the country. And, I mean, it was a great run. But again, towards the end of it, I got kind of burnt out. So it's funny. So we put out that Ghost Machine record for Ivan, and we all went and did this festival in Missouri. It turned out to be a complete bust. The promoter spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this festival, and then basically lost his ass. But it was a really special festival though, because it was actually Five Finger Death Punch's first show, and Motogrator did a reunion show, and it was their last show ever with Ivan. So it was literally so I was there for Five Finger Death Punch's first show. And when we left, Ivan came. So it was out in the middle of nowhere in Missouri. When we left that venue, Ivan came with us, and he was playing me the Five Finger Death Punch stuff. It was like the demos for the first record. I mean, the song "The Way of the Fist" was on there, and I mean, it was like pretty formed and developed what they were. And he's like, dude, we have this EP, I want you to put it out. And I was like, dude, I'm done. I'm over the label thing. I'm kind of shutting it down. But look, this is amazing, and you guys will find a great major label or a great label that'll pick it up, and this is going to be fucking huge. And it was. A couple months later, they signed to whatever label they signed to, and a couple years later, The Bleeding was the biggest thing in the world, and God bless them, man. But it's funny though. I was actually just talking to Mark I actually had a chance to sign a bunch of big bands of Corporate Punishment, but a lot of it was kind of towards the end when I was it just really didn't fit the brand to me of the label, or I was just kind of over it. Like I was just talking to Mark Heilman the other day from Suicide Silence, who I also work with now. And I was telling him the story of how Jerry Clubb, their old manager, was a big Chimera fan. And he brought me the first Suicide Silence demos, and he'd wanted me to do something on Corporate Punishment. And again, it was just one of the, I didn't really, I don't want to say a new metal label. We were just more kind of a modern hard rock label. And I totally, honestly, I didn't get metalcore yet. Nobody did. Suicide Silence was so ahead of the fucking game that I just don't think I was advanced enough to get it at the time. You know what I mean? But it didn't really fit the brand of what we did. And I'm dumb, man. I should have been looking forward and been like, yeah, this is the fucking, but he even said, he's like, look, back then we weren't the same band we were later, you know, even on the first record, you know, we weren't the first band. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly it. Like it was but yeah, I had the chance to sign some really cool bands on that label. I mean, at one point, you know, I In This Moment had been brought to us very early on, and Suicide Silence, and again, Five Finger Death Punch. I mean, it's, you know, I passed on some pretty monumental shit. Actually, when we were at Loudside, Jeff Blue from Warner Brothers, who discovered Linkin Park, brought Linkin Park over to us and had wanted us to do a Loudside label and originally release like kind of a debut Linkin Park EP, just sort of for hype. And we actually had a meeting about this. This was an actual thing that was talked about. And then for whatever reason, they decided to go a different way. But my dear friend Rob McDermott managed them, and I was, you know, had a good relationship with Jeff Blue, who was their A&R guy, and signed them. And yeah, I mean, that would have been really cool. It's just fun. That's just cool to have even been in that position and be able to tell that story, you know?
Yeah. No, I love to be honest, I'm a fan of Suicide Silence, Mitch Locker era.
Yeah, of course. Well, of course, everybody is.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I follow the band now too much after the new singer, but back then, being ahead of the curve, they really were. Like the first two albums, they just broke the mold.
I mean, look, and I personally think they're still fucking great. You know, I liked All Shall Perish. You know, funny enough, early enough, I kind of helped consult them when they were getting their first record deal. But I mean, you know, and I've actually, they're working on a new record, and and the new shit's really fucking great. I mean, look, I like the last two. I think you should go back and revisit them. I like the last two records. I like the new singer. I think they made a couple records where they were just kind of trying to experiment a little bit. But you know, the last record that came out a couple years ago is really heavy and really good. It's funny. The older they get, they're getting more into this almost old, it's almost like old school death metal, you know, the new stuff. I mean, you know, I mean, it's cool. I think they're getting more in touch with like the kind of roots of death metal and black metal. And it's interesting, man. I think Mark's one of the most interesting guitar players in the fucking game. I think he's incredible. And, you know, I think they're a good band. I mean, obviously everybody loves the Mitch era, and how are you going to beat YOLO? You know, I mean, how are you going to beat some of that shit, you know what I mean? But you know, I think they're doing a respectable job of rebuilding and kind of just keeping their heads down and just writing good stuff and being fucking heavy. And this comes from a guy who did not like the band at all when they came out. You know, I could have signed the band and I didn't. And now it's funny, the older I get now, I'm really going back and appreciating their catalog and the old stuff, the new stuff, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, definitely a good band overall. So, do you want to talk about THC music? And how
sure. I mean, look. So basically, I wrapped up Corporate Punishment. We had a brief thing at the end where, so basically, our distributor shut down. It was, I don't remember, they shut down. There was a bunch of shit going on, and we had kind of a falling out with the head of the company, and it just wasn't working anymore. So we went to and we did a deal with Trust Kill for a minute, and they were going to distribute us, and it just wasn't worth it, man. So I kind of laid low. I had my kids actually at the time. I just had my kids, so I kind of just took, you know, some time off to just kind of raise my kids. And you know, 6-7 years later, so I'd moved back to Wisconsin for a while I was running Corporate Punishment, and then you know, 6-7 years later, I'd moved back to LA. And to be totally honest, I didn't remember why the fuck I started THC. I mean, I don't remember. I was just like bored and restless and kind of looking for something to do. And, you know, some opportunities had come to sign some more bands. And I was working with a company called Rocket Science. We had put out, you know, I worked on the Angels and Airwaves record with them, a couple of the Filter records. a non-point record, some other stuff. And, you know, he offered me originally I got a distribution deal through Universal Fontana. And then I started doing joint venture deals with Rocket Science. And yeah, I put out one of West Borland's Blacklight Burns records. I put out a couple of different things that were cool. You know what I mean? So, and yeah, so it was kind of, and then that label still kind of exists. You know, I sort of put it on the back seat. You know, that label kind of existed, and then I did the EMP thing. You know, in Combat for the last 5 years, and now that's kind of wound itself down. But yeah, I mean, it was all a natural progression. I mean, EMP and Combat was just THC. It was all the same deals, all the same structure. I ran it the same way. It was THC with a different name. You know, I ran it the same way. I signed bands the same way. It was very artist friendly. At least I tried to be, you know, but yeah. So I mean, it just kind of naturally and it still exists to this day. I haven't put anything out in a while, but and with EMP, basically while I was doing EMP, some of the like real stuff that was dear to my heart, like kind of passion projects, I still put on THC. Like I did the last Chuck Mosley record. The original singer of Faith No More, who was one of my dear friends and I'd worked with, and he passed away now. And but yeah, the Chuck Mosley record, I did a Malfunction record with Kevin Wood, Andrew Wood's brother from Mother Love Bone, and Sean Smith, and that was on THC. I did a Kick Tracy double retrospective of demos and B-sides. That was on THC. But I've still kept THC alive and done some stuff in between there too, you know? So it's just kind of my thing. Whenever I find something worthy of putting out, I go, oh, here, I have THC, you know?
Yeah.
Which THC stands for the Thom Hazaert Company. How clever of me.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So we're back. All right. So yeah, you started THC, and then surprisingly, you also got into the film industry. You told me.
You know, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've always loved film, man. It's always been kind of my second love. But you know, in the man, I don't even remember, in the 2000s, I guess I hooked up with a couple. Well, I worked on a film that ended up being an award-winning music documentary called Long Way to the Top. And it was actually funny enough with Taylor Wallace from Trigger Point, one of the bands on Corporal Punishment, and Rob Montague, the singer from Shinoa, another band on Corporal Punishment. So again, you know, I kind of pride myself on, you know, trying to keep relationships, and, you know, bands that I worked with 30 years ago, I'm still kind of friends with, and you try and be that way, you know. But yeah, so we did this film called Long Way to the Top, which, you know, I got Phil Collin from Def Leppard in, who I worked with at the time, and West Borland, and that turned out great. And then I started doing some special. I met Michael Felsher at Red Shirt Pictures, and he did a lot of special features for Shout Factory and Scream Factory, and who are a great, you know, Blu-ray DVD label that re-release kind of classic movies. And so I ended up working on, you know, kind of co-producing some features for Army of Darkness and Exorcist 2 Exorcist 3. And shocker, I ended up directing a little documentary about the soundtrack that actually ended up on the Shout Factory re-release of that came out 5-6 years ago. And that was actually kind of how I connected with Ellison, and sort of how the whole EMP and all the bullshit I did with him kind of happened. It sort of came out of that Shocker thing, because I interviewed him for the Shocker documentary and whatever. So yeah, I mean, and I've always, you know, in sense, and I've done some, actually in the middle of directing working on a documentary right now. Last year I went out to LA and shot a bunch of people. I went to Utah to Post Malone's house and hung out with his dad Rich and filmed a bunch of stuff there. And so I've actually been working on a new music business documentary called Airplanes and Restaurants, which is all about kind of the A&R and the process of signing bands and developing bands. And it's really cool, man. I interviewed you know, Shifty and Epic from Crazy Town, and, you know, a bunch of people, man. It's been a really fun, interesting thing to do. And again, I've always loved film. It's always been one of my, and again, it goes hand in hand with the journalism, with telling stories. You know, it's just, you know, and I've written a couple books. Me and David Ellison wrote a book together that came out a couple years ago, and I've been working on another with Chris Poland, the original guitar player of Megadeth, for a couple years. I guess I just sort of like to, document history. I'm a fan of music and music history, and I kind of love being the guy that documents it for posterity for all time. You know what I mean? So, yeah, whether it's books, whether it's films, but generally that's the stuff I've done is documentaries. You know, whether they're short, feature length, whatever. You know, it's always been kind of sort of documentary type content, and you know, that's sort of the way I lean.
Did you ever watch the documentary Headbangers Ball? A heavy metal.
No.
It's
No.
like it reminded me because it's a documentary, and like that's how I got my knowledge of heavy metal and all the different subgenres. This guy travels the world and he goes to like Norway for black metal and
Oh, that's awesome.
goes, yeah, it's
What's it called? Headbangers Ball?
yeah, Headbangers Ball, yeah.
I'll find that.
It's yeah, so that's how I got into black metal. Because he went to Norway and he's like interviewing Gorgoroth and a bunch of other bands. And yeah, sorry.
And there's so when the light takes us, there's so many great. I mean, I love the Norwegian black metal scene, and there's so many great documentaries about it. And again, people talk shit about it, but I loved Lords of Chaos. I mean, I loved the book when it came out. I thought the movie was fucking great, you know. And it's funny because now my kid's 15 and they're into black metal and into that shit, and we watch Lords of Chaos together, and we do a lot of this stuff together, and it's funny to see these genres like just. It's funny. My kid now listens to all the shit she listens. They listen to Korn and Deftones and all the bands that I listened to and worked with, and you know, it's fun that we can it's fun to see these bands, these genres transcend generations now. It's kind of crazy to see and think about, you know.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, it's just cool to me. Like